When Mu Chen's voice spread throughout the hero's pavilion, the previously noisy and bustling atmosphere suddenly fell silent. Then, a series of astonished gazes locked onto him. None of them had expected that this seemingly gentle young man, once he spoke, would exude such dominance, showing no regard for the bear tyrant at all. After all, he was a high Earth Supreme. Moreover, the bear tyrant had quite a reputation in the Western Heaven continent, known as the Fire Cloud King, that he was infamous for. His ruthless and domineering ways. It was said that he once clashed with a rival faction, and in the process, he tore apart 2 lower Earth Supremes from that faction, crushing them into a bloody mist. His reputation for violence spread far and wide, and few dared to provoke him. However, now, Mu Chen had the audacity to publicly humiliate him like this. Such boldness truly seemed a bit out of place. The astonished voices echoed throughout the hero's pavilion. The bear tyrant's eyes instantly turned bloodshot, his gaze, filled with murderous intent, fixed on Mu Chen as he bared his teeth and snarled. "Kid, how dare you speak to me like that? Do you seek death?" But despite facing the enraged bear tyrant, Mu Chen merely smiled indifferently and said, "I am the Lord of Mu Manor. Even a full Earth Supreme is under my command. You, a mere high Earth Supreme, what are you going to do about it?" Upon hearing Mu Chen's words, many of the powerful figures in the hero's pavilion paused, realizing that not only was Mu Chen the leader of a powerful faction, but he also had a full Earth Supreme under his command. With such a lineup, even in the Western Heaven continent, his faction could be considered among the very top. With such a powerful background, the bear tyrant seemed like someone who didn't pose any real threat to Mu Chen at this moment. The bear tyrant also realized this, and his expression changed slightly. He snorted coldly and said, "So what? Are you planning to lead your forces to attack me? Let's see if the Western Heaven Battle Hall will let you have your way." Although his words were still fierce, anyone could tell that the bear tyrant's anger had somewhat diminished. Although you have a full Earth Supreme under your command, do you think you can bring her here to take your place in the Upper Earth Supreme battlefield? Suddenly sneered the blood spirit son in front of the bear tyrant. Hearing this, the bear tyrant's eyes flashed, and he laughed coldly. "Indeed, you're cunning. I was just questioning your ability to participate in the Upper Earth Supreme battlefield. What does it matter who is under your command? I see you're scared stiff by me and are just making excuses to interfere. If you're capable, then take my punch. If you can take it, not only will I apologize, but I'll never trouble you again. But if you can't even take one punch, then I suggest you give up your spot to me to avoid dying." Though the bear tyrant was imposing, it was clear his mind wasn't entirely filled with muscles. He smirked ominously as he spoke. His intent was obvious: to claim Mu Chen's spot. Given the Western Heaven Battle Emperor's clear displeasure with Mu Chen, if the bear tyrant could seize his spot here, even if he didn't have the qualifications to participate, the Western Heaven Battle Emperor would likely turn a blind eye and might even approve of the bear tyrant's actions. This kind of 2-for-1 deal was something the bear tyrant had been planning, which was why he had colluded with the blood spirit son to create trouble for Mu Chen. "Kid, do you dare?" The bear tyrant glared at Mu Chen as he shouted, "I in the hero's pavilion." A chorus of agreement rang out. Many chose to support the bear tyrant, since to the top powerhouses of the Western Heaven continent, Mu Chen was just an outsider. Furthermore, most of the super-strong participants in the Upper Earth Supreme battlefield believed that it would be beneath them to fight for a spot in the Lower Earth Supreme competition. Thus, if Mu Chen lost his spot, they would be more than happy to see it happen. Luo God and Luo Li noticed the many powerful figures backing the bear tyrant, and their brows furrowed slightly. It was clear that they had underestimated how unwelcome Mu Chen was in the Western Heaven continent. These circumstances, no doubt, were a result of the Western Heaven Battle Emperor's stance. However, if this continued, Mu Chen's future would undoubtedly become less peaceful. Even if he ignored the bear tyrant, more people with the same attitude would keep coming, which would certainly drain Mu Chen's energy. Mu Chen, naturally, was aware of this, so he narrowed his eyes and stared at the bear tyrant. With a calm tone, he said, "You really want to fight me with a punch?" Hearing what seemed like a hint of compromise, the bear tyrant's eyes gleamed with excitement, and he eagerly asked, "So you agree?" Mu Chen smiled and said, You've got a good plan. If I lose, I'll have to give up such a valuable spot. But if I win, you'll apologize? Is your apology really worth that much? The bear tyrant's brow furrowed. Then what do you want? Mu Chen lazily lifted his eyelids and said with a half-smile, I'll take your punch, but the price is 80 million supreme spiritual liquid per punch. Upon hearing this, the bear tyrant's eyelids twitched, and he roared angrily. 80 million supreme spiritual liquid for a punch. Are you worth it? Inside the hero's pavilion, many top-tier powerhouses couldn't help but laugh out loud. 80 million supreme spiritual liquid was nearly enough to purchase a low-level sacred artifact, and the asking price for Mu Chen was truly steep. I'm not worth that much, but the contest spot for the Continental heir is definitely worth that price. Mu Chen smiled and said. His gaze then turned cold as he spoke with a frosty voice. If you can't even afford this price, then you should leave now and stop embarrassing yourself here. Bear Tyrant's eyes reddened with rage, his entire body surrounded by a terrifying murderous aura. 80 million supreme spiritual liquid was no small amount, and his own foundation wasn't that deep. For a moment, he found himself unable to gather the funds. He then turned to look at Blood Spirit's son, but the latter appeared somewhat awkward, avoiding eye contact. The Blood God clan had already made significant efforts to deal with the Luo God clan, incurring great costs, while 80 million supreme spiritual liquid wasn't entirely out of reach. Using it on Bear Tyrant felt like an unnecessary waste. After all, Blood Spirit's son had already witnessed Mu Chen's cunning, and seeing that Mu Chen was daring enough to challenge him, he became cautious that he feared that if they handed over the supreme spiritual liquid, it might be wasted. Seeing the awkward expression on Blood Spirit's son, Bear Tyrant's anger surged even more. His face flushed red with fury. He never expected that Mu Chen would turn the tables and make him look so pitiful. Mu Chen glanced at Bear Tyrant's pitiful state and smiled faintly. His exaggerated demand wasn't just to make things hard for Bear Tyrant, but also to set a boundary that he wanted everyone to know that if they were after his spot, they needed to be ready to pay 80 million supreme spiritual liquid. Otherwise, with waves of challengers coming, even if he were made of iron, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. The many powerhouses who witnessed Bear Tyrant's situation were somewhat disappointed. They had originally hoped to measure Mu Chen's strength, but it seemed that Bear Tyrant was just too weak to be of any use. 80 million supreme spiritual liquid, huh? That's quite a hefty price, but fine, I'll cover it for him. Just as many of the powerhouses thought this matter was coming to an end, a slightly coquettish laugh suddenly rang out within the hero's pavilion. Everyone's gaze immediately turned, and on the third floor, a graceful figure slowly emerged, her charming and alluring face coming into view. It's actually Ling Feizi, one of the 4 holy sons of the Western Heaven Battle Hall. Why is she here, involving herself in this matter? Ling Feizi must be here to compete with Luo Li. TSK. The competition between women can sometimes be more intense than between men. As Ling Feizi appeared, whispers spread throughout the pavilion. She immediately cast a glance at Luo Li's position, and the latter noticed the provocative look in her eyes. They both raised their heads slightly, and their gazes met, seemingly sparking invisible flames between them. Seeing the two women's behavior, the many powerhouses present realized that the 2 hottest contenders for victory in the Lower Earth Supreme battlefield had already started to clash. Under the scrutiny of many eyes, Ling Feizi raised her jade hand, and a jade vial glowing with spiritual light flew straight towards Bear Tyrant. She smiled coquettishly. 80 million supreme spiritual liquid is here that I trust Bear King won't disappoint us, right? Bear Tyrant caught the flying vial with joy and laughed heartily. Miss Ling Feizi, don't worry. This king will make that kid regret ever trying to show off on our Western Heaven continent. Ling Feizi smiled sweetly. While 80 million supreme spiritual liquid wasn't a small sum for her, if Bear Tyrant could snatch Mu Chen's spot, it would not only allow the War Emperor to vent his anger, but also severely humiliate Luo Li. Her. This was worth 1,000 times more. She looked at Luo Li with a smile, but Luo Li's calm demeanor made her feel particularly uncomfortable. Ling Feizi sneered inwardly, waiting for Mu Chen to be humiliated. She was eager to see how Luo Li would maintain her aloof composure after that. Bear Tyrant held the jade vial, and glared at Mu Chen. His expression twisted with malice. He sneered. "Kid, I wonder what excuse you'll come up with this time." To him, Mu Chen's previous conditions had been nothing more than a deliberate attempt to make things difficult for him and escape from the challenge. Mu Chen smiled at his words, glancing at Ling Feizi. With his sharp eyes, he could clearly tell that Ling Feizi was targeting Luo Li. But with this in mind, he had even less reason to back down. Under the watchful eyes of the many powerful figures present, Mu Chen took a step forward. He extended his hand toward Bear Tyrant, slightly curling his fingers, before once again uttering something astonishing. "Since someone is so wealthy and generous, then I shall stand here, unmoving, and take your punch head-on." Unmoving, taking your punch head-on. Mu Chen's voice echoed throughout the hero's pavilion, causing the gathered elites to exchange glances. Soon after, a hint of amusement flickered in their eyes. Clearly, his stance was entirely unexpected. Not only did he accept Bear Tyrant's provocation, but he even made such an outrageously bold statement. A lower Earth Supreme wanting to withstand the direct attack of an upper Earth Supreme? That was no simple feat. On the third floor, Ling Feizi's beautiful eyes flickered slightly before her rosy lips curved into a playful smile. She chuckled and said, "I never expected such a gallant man. He has truly made me see him in a new light. Bear King, since he's asking for it so earnestly, you might as well grant his wish." Hearing this, many of the powerful figures present chuckled quietly. This woman, when she played ruthless, could send chills down one's spine. With just that one sentence, she had completely shut down any retreat for Mu Chen. No matter what, he had to go through with it now. Even if his previous words had been mere arrogance, there was no turning back at this point. Mu Chen had no choice but to swallow his own words whole. However, what surprised the crowd was that despite Ling Feizi's remark, the young man in the arena remained calm and unfazed, as if he hadn't heard her at all. His tranquility made some experts secretly wonder. Could it be that he really had something up his sleeve? After all, facing an Upper Earth Supreme head-on with the power of a Lower Earth Supreme was no trivial matter. Amidst the many skeptical gazes, Bear Tyrant's face darkened, filled with menacing fury. His eyes gleamed with viciousness as he glared at Mu Chen. Clearly, he hadn't expected the latter to be so dismissive of him. Did this fool not realize that his greatest strength lay in direct confrontations? Even some Upper Earth Supremes dared not challenge his raw power head-on. "You brat, it seems you have a death wish." Bear Tyrant's bloodshot eyes locked onto Mu Chen, his expression like that of a beast ready to devour its prey. Mu Chen frowned slightly. "Enough with the nonsense. Are we doing this or not?" Bear Tyrant nearly exploded with rage at Mu Chen's dismissive attitude, his fury boiling over. But in the end, he suppressed his urge to lash out immediately, gritting his teeth as he growled, "Fine, today, I'll grant your wish." Boom. The moment his words fell, an explosion of crimson spiritual energy erupted from within Bear Tyrant. It carried an overwhelmingly violent aura, surging like a storm. The sheer force of it caused the very space around him to crack. His energy was brutal and untamed, and within its roar, one could faintly hear the bellowing of a bear reverberating through the battlefield. At the same time, his body began to swell, growing into the size of a small giant. His features contorted into something almost monstrous, resembling a humanoid berserk bear. The gathered elites in the hero's pavilion all narrowed their eyes at the sight. It said that Bear Tyrant's cultivation technique requires the blood of the ancient divine beast, the sky-splitting blood bear, to fuse with his spiritual energy. That power is overwhelmingly violent, carrying the strength to rend sky and earth alike. Truly overbearing. One of the experts murmured in awe. Luo, heavenly god, observing Bear Tyrant's growing momentum, grew noticeably more solemn. That a sliver of worry crept into his heart. It was clear that Bear Tyrant intended to push his spiritual energy to its limits and obliterate Mu Chen in a single punch. However, amidst the gasps of the audience, Mu Chen merely squinted at the sight of Bear Tyrant's transformation. He keenly sensed the oppressive ferocity radiating from his opponent, and his gaze flickered slightly. Waves of spiritual energy surged out from Bear Tyrant's body, each wave stronger than the last. Finally, When it reached its peak, he tilted his head back and let out an earth-shaking roar, one that carried the might of a rampaging bear. The sound waves visibly distorted the air, tearing cracks into space itself. Boom! His ocean-like spiritual energy surged wildly within him, his bloodshot eyes locking onto Mu Chun in the next instant. He stomped down hard, and the solid floor, crafted from rare, sturdy materials, was instantly reduced to dust. The massive figure of Bear Tyrant turned into a streak of light, shooting out with a whoosh. His right fist swung forward in a slow, heavy motion, as if preparing for a mighty strike. In that instant, behind Bear Tyrant, a colossal, ancient savage bear seemed to materialize. The bear swiped its paw forward, its force merging with Bear Tyrant's fist. Boom! Boom! As the wind from the punch passed, it carried with it a scarlet-red energy that shattered the very space itself. Countless fragments of space disintegrated into endless specks of light upon contact with the punch's force. Great demon heaven-shattering fist. The roar of the bear reverberated as Bear Tyrant's fist collided forward. The sheer might of the punch caused even the many Upper Earth Supremes present to change their expressions slightly, evidently shaken by the impact. This punch gathered all of Bear Tyrant's spiritual energy. Though he appeared robust, he was clearly cunning, wary that Mu Chun might have some hidden tricks up his sleeve to eliminate any possibility of that. He chose the most straightforward approach, using his overwhelming Upper Earth Supreme spiritual power to utterly crush Mu Chun from the front. Though this attack seemed clumsy, it was indeed the path of kingship. And no matter how many tricks you have, I will simply crush you and see how you can block it. After all, Mu Chun was only a lower Earth Supreme, and with the vast spiritual power of an Upper Earth Supreme, it was enough to crush any defense of a lower Earth Supreme. So, when Bear Tyrant unleashed this punch, many of the top powerhouses around couldn't help but express admiration. Such an assault could only be avoided, and even Mu Chun had arrogantly claimed he would stand his ground and not retreat. This, to them, was a sure path to destruction. Seeing this, Ling Feizi couldn't help but curl the corner of her mouth into a mocking smile. She knew that Mu Chun would pay a heavy price for his arrogance. Under the gaze of those who either lamented or gloated, Mu Chun stared at the incoming iron fist, took a deep breath, then spread his legs slightly, extending his palm in an apparent gesture to take the blow head-on. However, no one noticed that deep within Mu Chun's eyes, a crystalline glow began to shimmer. All of his spiritual energy was now channeled into the crystal pagoda of transcendence within him, eventually transforming into a vast and mighty crystal spiritual power. The faint crystalline glow started to radiate from Mu Chun's body. The terrifyingly violent punch from Bear Tyrant came crashing forward. Die, wretched fool! Bear Tyrant's roar shook the heavens. His face twisted in a grotesque sneer. A terrible malevolent aura swept across the battlefield. And then, in front of countless gazes, his fist slammed down on Mu Chun's outstretched palm. Boom! The moment their fists and palms collided, it was as if a thunderous explosion sounded out of nowhere. Everyone watched as Mu Chun's robes billowed up, fluttering in the wind. That moment, Mu Chun's palm turned blood red, with faint traces of blood seeping through. A result of Bear Tyrant's overwhelming and brutal spiritual power impact that a storm of crimson spiritual energy engulfed both of them. You will watch as I shatter your body, piece by piece. Bear Tyrant sneered. Then, with a thought, the red, violent spiritual energy surged like a raging torrent, pouring into Mu Chun's body through the contact point, intending to crush his body from within. This kind of brutality was not new to Bear Tyrant. He had done it before, and the result had been the explosive demise of two lower Earth Supremes, leaving nothing but blood and bone. Boom! The crimson spiritual energy, driven by Bear Tyrant's will, flooded into Mu Chun's body. But just then, Bear Tyrant noticed something that caused him to halt in shock. Mu Chun's lips curled into a mocking smile. You're about to die, and you still try to act mysterious. Bear Tyrant's eyes darkened, ready to ignite the violent energy within Mu Chun's body. However, in that instant, Bear Tyrant's pupils contracted in terror. He was horrified to discover that the violent spiritual energy flooding into Mu Chen's body had suddenly lost all connection with him, that it felt as if Mu Chen's body had turned into a black hole, absorbing and dissolving all the spiritual energy that entered it. Impossible. Bear Tyrant's face, once twisted with cruelty, was now painted with disbelief. However, in stark contrast to the incredibility of Bear Tyrant, Mu Chen gave a faint, cold smile. Indeed, Bear Tyrant's spiritual energy was extremely violent, but unfortunately, Mu Chen, at this moment, was least afraid of spiritual energy invading his body. This was because, within Mu Chen's body, crystal spiritual energy continuously roared. Whenever this crystal energy came into contact with the fiery red energy rushing into his body, the latter would immediately quiet down, as it was directly sealed away. At this moment, many of the powerful figures present also noticed something was wrong. Their expressions changed slightly as they realized that no matter how frantically Bear Tyrant activated his spiritual energy to try and shatter Mu Chen's body, the latter remained completely still, not even his feet moving an inch. How could this be? The hearts of these top-tier powerhouses were shaken, and they all wore solemn expressions. And just as everyone's hearts were vibrating, Mu Chen gave Bear Tyrant a faint smile and said, "You want your spiritual energy back? Here, take it." His other hand gently clenched, and immediately, fiery red spiritual energy surged out, transforming in the blink of an eye into a fiery red energy sphere about 100 feet in size. The energy sphere contained an extremely violent force. Mu Chen held the sphere and directly swung it toward Bear Tyrant. However, upon seeing Mu Chen's action, Bear Tyrant revealed a crazed laugh. When the fiery red energy sphere, which appeared almost tangible, touched his body, it quickly entered his body as if it had met water sinking into a sponge. "Haha, you fool. You actually think you can use my own energy to attack me? What a fool's hope." Bear Tyrant laughed wildly. "Really?" However, in response to his laughter, Mu Chen's eyes flickered with a strange smile. And just as his words finished, Bear Tyrant's expression changed drastically because he realized that as the energy that originally belonged to him surged into his body, all the spiritual energy within him seemed to be infected by something, losing control completely. In just a few breaths, the terrifying spiritual energy that had surrounded Bear Tyrant's body vanished in an instant. "My spiritual energy?" Bear Tyrant's eyes filled with shock. "Why don't you try taking a punch from me?" Before he could even analyze the changes in his internal energy, Mu Chen smiled at him, and then took a step forward. His fist, like thunder, heavily struck Bear Tyrant's chest, where all the spiritual energy had dissipated, leaving him defenseless. Boom! A deep sound echoed, and Bear Tyrant's body was sent flying, skidding across the ground, leaving a long trail that a mouthful of blood sprayed out, and his chest collapsed inward. At this moment, the entire room fell silent. Even though the top powerhouses present were extraordinary, they couldn't help but stare, dumbfounded. They never imagined that despite Bear Tyrant's mighty punch, which should have been overwhelming, it not only failed to produce any effect, but instead, Bear Tyrant's own spiritual energy dissipated, leaving him with huge vulnerabilities, and Mu Chen had knocked him to the ground in such a miserable state. In the midst of the stunned gazes, Mu Chen stood with his fist withdrawn, a smile appearing on his youthful and handsome face. He looked up and smiled faintly at Ling Feizi, whose face had turned a little pale. "I'll take the 80 million supreme spiritual liquid." In the hero's pavilion, a deep crack extended from the main hall to the entrance. As they looked at this crack, the expressions of the various top powerhouses gradually turned serious. What had just happened was far too strange, and they had no idea what had occurred. Bear Tyrant's punch was supposed to be a ferocious strike, something even the Upper Earth Supreme would have to take seriously. However, Mu Chen simply raised his hand to face it. The end result wasn't that Mu Chen was killed by a single punch, but rather, Bear Tyrant, who should have been dominating, suddenly had his spiritual energy dimmed, and then was knocked back by a punch from Mu Chen, spitting blood. Such a scenario seemed deeply odd. Thus, the uncertain gazes began to shift toward the ever-calm Mu Chen. They obviously wouldn't think that Bear Tyrant was pretending to be insane. So, the only explanation left was that Chen had employed some unseen technique that they hadn't noticed, and no matter what, Xiongba's punch had utterly failed, leaving him in such a disgraceful state. This was enough to make everyone realize that this young man, despite only possessing the strength of a lower Earth Supreme, had some truly extraordinary abilities. From his performance, he was clearly qualified to enter the upper Earth Supreme battlefield. Some powerful figures who had initially been dissatisfied with Chen's involvement fell silent. They began to take note of his name because, from his earlier display, they could faintly sense a dangerous aura emanating from him. If they continued to underestimate him, then should they encounter him in the upper Earth Supreme battlefield, Xiongba's fate might very well become their OW. As the gathered elites at Heroes Pavilion processed these thoughts, Xiongba stood up at the entrance, his eyes bloodshot. The raging spiritual energy that had vanished from his body now surged forth once again, like a violent storm. His collapsed chest was rapidly healing. Chen's punch had not been a killing blow, though Xiongba appeared battered. Such injuries were trivial for an Upper Earth Supreme's tenacious vitality. Yet, despite not being severely wounded, Xiongba had suffered an even greater humiliation. His bloodshot eyes locked onto Chen as he roared, "You bastard! What kind of trick did you pull?" The frustration in Xiongba's heart was immeasurable. He simply couldn't comprehend why his spiritual energy had vanished at such a critical moment, becoming completely unresponsive to his control. The only possible explanation was that Chen had done something to him. However, Chen paid him no mind. With a flick of his hand, the jade bottle lying nearby flew into his grasp. He spoke calmly. "You simply weren't good enough. I refuse to accept this." Xiongba bellowed furiously and stomped the ground, his figure once again shooting forward like a bolt of lightning, intent on attacking. But Chen merely lifted an eyelid and said indifferently, "Another punch. That'll be 80 million Supreme Spiritual Liquid." Swish. Xiongba's charge came to an abrupt halt. He glared at Chen with such fury that his hair stood on end. Grinding his teeth, he roared, "You still want more? Keep dreaming." Chen chuckled. "No worries. When the time comes, our Manor's perfect Earth Supreme will collect the debt that I doubt even the Western Battle Emperor will be able to interfere with such a legitimate claim." Xiongba's face turned ashen, his fists trembling. His rage was so overwhelming that he nearly lost control and attacked Chen on the spot. But in the end, he forcibly suppressed his fury. This young man was no ordinary lower Earth Supreme. His influence and connections were not to be underestimated. You'd better remember this. With his face twisting between anger and humiliation, Xiongba could only leave behind these parting words before fleeing Heroes Pavilion in disgrace under the mocking gazes of the crowd. Blood Spirit Sun, who had been watching from the side, frowned at Xiongba's pathetic retreat. His expression darkened as he gazed at Chen. Never had he expected Xiongba to be unable to handle him. This brat has grown stronger again. Blood Spirit Sun clenched his teeth. A month ago, back at Luo River, Chen had already demonstrated remarkable prowess. But he was certain that at that time, Chen could not have reached this level, where he could effortlessly fend off an Upper Earth Supreme's full-force assault. It was clear that in just a month, Chen's strength had undergone a tremendous leap. "If you want to deal with me next time, don't use someone else. Face me yourself." Chen glanced at Blood Spirit Sun with a faint smile, his gaze carrying a cold edge that he had seen through it all. Xiongba had been nothing more than a pawn in Blood Spirit Sun's scheme to stir up trouble for him. Blood Spirit Sun snorted coldly. "I don't know what trick you pulled, but now that you've revealed your methods, once you enter the Upper Earth Supreme battlefield, many will be on guard against you. You won't have such an easy time then." Despite his cunning nature, Blood Spirit Sun's perception was sharp. He had already deduced that Xiongba's defeat stemmed from Chen's direct spiritual energy interference. As long as others took precautions against this in future battles, the effectiveness of Chen's trump card would be significantly reduced. Despicable old fox. Luo Heavenly God gritted his teeth in anger, clearly furious at Blood Spirit Sun's scheming. But Chen remained composed. He merely smirked at Blood Spirit Sun and said, "When we meet again, you'll see just how many cards I still have up my sleeve." Blood Spirit Sun's expression flickered. His heart skipped a beat. but he quickly let out a chilling laugh. "Oh, I'll look forward to it. Just be careful. If you run into me on the battlefield and I accidentally kill you, not even the Flame Emperor will be able to avenge you." Mu Chen chuckled nonchalantly. "You old bastard, as if you had the ability." Disrespected by Mu Chen in such a manner, Blood Spirit Sun's forehead bulged with veins, but he still managed to endure it. He shot a cold, menacing glance at Mu Chen, then flicked his sleeve and walked away. As Blood Spirit Sun and Bear Tyrant left, the atmosphere in the hero's pavilion gradually returned to normal. However, after the earlier battle, the top elites from various factions now looked at Mu Chen with a bit more caution and less contempt. It seemed that forcing Bear Tyrant to leave in such a disgraceful state had indeed achieved some results, to the very least. No one without a spot would dare attempt to find an opening with him again. Moreover, even if they did, they'd have to think carefully about whether they could afford the cost. On the third floor, Ling Feizi's delicate face turned pale as she watched Bear Tyrant's retreating figure. Eventually, she gritted her teeth and muttered, "Useless fools." She had invested 80 million supreme spiritual liquid, hoping that Bear Tyrant could dampen Mu Chen's spirit. That way, she could use the opportunity to strike at Luo Li. But who could have expected that Bear Tyrant would be so ineffective, unable to deal with Mu Chen and, in the end, wasted her 80 million supreme spiritual liquid. The amount of supreme spiritual liquid was no small sum, even for someone like her, a holy son of the Western Heaven Battle Hall. "Miss Ling Feizi, if you truly have nothing better to do, perhaps you should make some preparations. When we enter the Lower Earth Supreme Battlefield, I'll accompany you however you'd like to play." Luo Li suddenly raised her delicate face, her crystal-like eyes revealing a slight chill as she looked at Ling Feizi. Her cold voice echoed in the hero's pavilion. The moment Luo Li's voice rang out, all the gazes in the hero's pavilion instantly shifted toward her. The top elites of various factions exchanged knowing looks, clearly amused. It seemed that Ling Feizi's support of Bear Tyrant to deal with Mu Chen had ruffled the feathers of the Luo God clan's queen. Luo Li was indeed angry. How could she not see the deep animosity Ling Feizi harbored toward her? While she usually didn't care about such things, she couldn't ignore the fact that Ling Feizi had used such methods to trouble Mu Chen. So, after remaining silent all this time, she finally turned her attention directly to Ling Feizi. On the third floor, Ling Feizi, caught off guard by Luo Li's directness, froze for a moment. Then her expression twisted with anger. With a cold laugh, she said, "Fine, I'll accompany you to the end. We'll see who outplays whom." With those words, she lost interest and waved her sleeve, her cold face turning away as she departed. "You need to be extra cautious with this woman." Mu Chen looked at Ling Feizi's departing figure and whispered to Luo Li, "Sometimes, the scheming between women can be more ruthless than men's." Ling Feizi was clearly no easy opponent. Luo Li smiled slightly. "I know, but I haven't been idle these years." Mu Chen nodded with a smile. Luo Li had managed to maintain the once unstable Luo God clan and even had it on the rise. With such a skillful hand, it was clear that she was no ordinary figure. While Ling Feizi may not be a pushover, it wouldn't be so easy for her to outsmart Luo Li. "Let's go," Luo Tianxin said, intending to lead the two of them to rest for a while. "Wait a moment." Mu Chen suddenly smiled. He glanced at the top contender's monument, then tossed a jade vial containing 80 million supreme spiritual liquid toward a maid in the hall, saying with a grin, "Deposit these supreme spiritual liquids." "Lord, who would you like to invest in?" The maid blinked in surprise that Mu Chen revealed a grin. Since the top elites of the Western Heaven continent mostly excluded him, he couldn't be bothered with hiding his intentions anymore, but he smiled again and said, "Invest in me for the championship." In an instant, many of the top elites in the hero's pavilion were slightly shaken, their eyes filled with intrigue. Mu Chen had boldly chosen to target the champion of the Upper Earth Supreme Battlefield. This young man really had some nerve. Could it be that this year's Upper Earth Supreme Battlefield was going to see an unexpected dark horse emerge? Over the next few days, the atmosphere in Western Heaven War City remained intense, and with the upcoming battle, the tension reached its peak. The entire city was on the verge of boiling over. Amidst the rising fervor, countless pieces of information were spreading rapidly, especially regarding the top contenders for the championship. These individuals had become the focal point of attention for nearly the entire Western Heaven War City and even the Western Heaven continent. However, in this atmosphere, figures who had previously been relatively unknown began to emerge, and it became clear that they had been biding their time for years, waiting for the upcoming Continental air competition, aiming to soar to great heights. Similarly, the news of Chun's clash with Bear Tyrant in the Heroes' Pavilion, where he sent him reeling with a single punch, quickly spread, drawing a great deal of attention. As a result, Chen's total betting amount on the championship board reached 100 million supreme spiritual liquid, pushing him into the top 10. However, of this 100 million, 80 million was his own investment. Nevertheless, regardless of the circumstances, his battle with Bear Tyrant had a considerable deterrent effect in the days that followed. Although strong figures still covetously eyed the spot Chen held, no one dared to easily challenge him. The reason for this was the astronomical wager Chen had set, 80 million for a single punch. This amount was something even the wealthiest Upper Earth Supremes could not casually throw around. Of course, the most important factor was that they did not have absolute confidence that, after paying such a price, they would achieve the desired result. After all, Bear Tyrant's failure served as a clear warning that Chen's punch was incredibly mysterious, and after Bear Tyrant's defeat, he could not bear to stay in Western Heaven War City. This left many people unsure of what hidden secrets Chen's seemingly ordinary punch held, capable of making an Upper Earth Supreme suffer such a loss. The unknown was clearly something to be wary of, therefore, until they were absolutely sure. No one dared to easily seek trouble with Chen, allowing him a few peaceful days. During this brief respite, several days quickly passed, and the Continental air competition for the Western Heaven continent finally arrived, much to the anticipation of countless people. When the day of the battle arrived, countless war drums were beaten in Western Heaven War City, their thunderous sound reverberating through the heavens and earth, igniting the blood of many. The beat of the drums seemed to contain overwhelming battle intent, inspiring everyone's fighting spirit. The moment the war drums sounded, the sky above Western Heaven War City suddenly erupted with a thunderous rush of wind, followed by immense, boundless spiritual energy shooting straight into the sky, no longer hidden in the slightest. These spiritual energy fluctuations were exceptionally powerful. If they had appeared anywhere else, they would have surely drawn the attention of all, evoking awe. However, now, they were like a fountain in the vast ocean, not drawing much notice. This demonstrated just how many top-tier experts had gathered for this battle for the Continental air of the Western Heaven continent. The center of Western Heaven War City, outside the Western Heaven Battle Hall, a white jade-like plaza stood by now. The plaza was already surrounded by a sea of people, seemingly without end. On the plaza, war drums continued to sound. Clearly, the war drum beats reverberating throughout the city emanated from here. Swish, swish. At this moment, spiritual energy, light, and shadows constantly streaked across the sky, ultimately landing on the plaza, where they stood, hands clasped, their expressions solemn, showing none of their usual arrogance. This was because the plaza was near the Western Heaven Battle Hall, and the aura of a certain important figure inside the hall subtly spread out in front of a heavenly supreme. Even these usually proud top-tier experts dared not act recklessly, adopting an obedient and subdued manner. This moment, Chen and Luo Li also arrived together, landing in the plaza. However, when they appeared, they immediately attracted numerous curious glances, but most of these eyes were focused on Luo Li, who stood beside Chen. Today, Luo Li wore a deep purple gown that accentuated her slender and graceful figure, making her curves alluring and exuding an air of nobility and elegance. Her long hair cascaded like the Milky Way, falling to her waist. Her exquisite face, though partially veiled, still revealed her crystal-clear, glass-like eyes. In every glance, she radiated an extraordinary beauty that made it hard for anyone to look away. Truly worthy of being the heir of the most beautiful woman from the ancient era's great thousand worlds. Countless people gasped in awe as they gazed upon Luo Li. Over the years, she had completely shed the youthful innocence of her teenage years, exuding an elegance and composure that was simply breathtaking. Her poise, in that moment, was so captivating that it drew the attention of everyone around her. Even the top-tier powerhouses in the plaza in an instant. Mu Chen, who stood beside her, seemed almost out of place. These bastards. Mu Chen noticed their gazes and couldn't help but curse with a grin. Luo Li, however, was accustomed to such attention. She merely smiled gently, her beautiful eyes curving like crescent moons as she looked at Mu Chen. The elegance of her expression left those around them momentarily stunned, their gazes locked in admiration. Whoosh, whoosh. At that moment, 3 piercing sounds of wind breaking through the air echoed across the sky. 3 figures descended from above, landing directly in the plaza. The crowd's attention immediately shifted towards them, and Mu Chen also turned his gaze. Sensing a dangerous aura emanating from the trio, as his eyes scanned them, he observed the first figure, a middle-aged man clad in a black robe, adorned with countless starry patterns. Despite his white hair, his refined and gentle face exuded an aura of quiet strength. The second figure wore a green robe, carrying a rusted iron sword on his back. That a sharp and intimidating sword intent surrounded him, and wherever his feet landed, the ground was scarred by the sweeping sword energy. The third figure was more imposing, with long, untamed hair and a rugged face. His sheer presence radiated an unexplainable, overwhelming force. Mu Chen recognized them immediately if his guesses were correct. These were the 3 renowned Upper Earth Supremes of the Western Heaven Continent, whom Luo Li had mentioned. Lu Xingchen, the Master of the Star Pavilion. Mu, the Langya Sword Immortal. Chu Min, the Overlord of the Blade. Indeed, they are extraordinary. Mu Chen's eyes gleamed as soon as they appeared. Many Upper Earth Supremes in the plaza gave them wary, respectful glances, clearly intimidated by their presence. Despite the attention, the trio remained calm and composed, showing no sign of hesitation or discomfort, suggesting that they were far from ordinary. Boom! As the crowd grew larger, a deep, rumbling sound of a war drum echoed throughout the plaza. Everyone looked up, sensing the shift in the at the far end of the plaza. Before the towering battle hall, a golden throne appeared atop the myriad stone steps. On one of the thrones sat a majestic figure draped in golden robes, leaning lazily against the backrest. The moment this figure appeared, the entire world seemed to be enveloped in an invisible pressure. The once boisterous crowd fell silent, and countless awe-filled gazes turned towards him. Bow to the War Emperor. In an instant, the voices of countless people reverberated through the air as they clasped their fists and bowed respectfully. The person sitting on the throne was none other than the ruler of the Western Heaven Continent, the Heavenly Supreme War Emperor. In response to the reverence, the War Emperor gave a slight nod and then lifted his gaze towards the sky, smiling. It is truly an honor to have the Flame Emperor grace my Western Heaven Battle Hall. The War Emperor has invited me. How could I not come? As the War Emperor's voice trailed off, the air suddenly twisted. Flames erupted from the void, coalescing into a tall figure that materialized before them. The figure was engulfed in brilliant flames, and as soon as he appeared, the overwhelming pressure that had filled the air from the War Emperor quickly dissipated. Is that the Flame Emperor of the boundless fire domain? Across the plaza, countless powerhouses looked up, their eyes filled with shock and reverence. The name of the Flame Emperor resonated throughout the great thousand worlds, a figure whose fame eclipsed even the War Emperors, despite the latter's status as one of the peak powerhouses in the realm. Even with his pride, the War Emperor could not help but acknowledge the superiority of such a figure. However, figures of such caliber are always elusive, like a divine dragon whose head is rarely seen. Even though it seems like the Flame Emperor's spiritual projection has descended, the question remains, why has he come to the Western Heaven Continent to observe the battle for the position of Continental heir? Some people's eyes flickered, and their gazes subtly shifted toward Mu Chen's location. It seemed that, not long ago, during their time in the Luo God clan, it was Mu Chen who had summoned the Flame Emperor, causing the Western Heaven Battle Emperor to return empty-handed. Moreover, it was said that even Mu Chen's qualification to compete for the position of Continental heir was obtained by the Flame Emperor, who personally intervened and requested it from the Battle Emperor. Thus, It became clear the Flame Emperor's arrival this time was likely not without reason, and it was probably related to Mu Chen. This kid has such a background. No wonder he's not afraid of the Western Heaven Battle Hall. Some of the powerful figures secretly sighed, envious. After all, in the Great Thousand Worlds, having any connection with the Flame Emperor is no easy feat amidst countless gazes of reverence. The Flame Emperor descended from the heavens and landed on the golden throne beside the Battle Emperor. After sitting down, the Flame Emperor's eyes swept across the crowd and soon landed on Mu Chen's figure. He immediately smiled and nodded at him. Mu Chen, noticing the Flame Emperor's gaze, also smiled and cupped his fists in respect. The Flame Emperor's gaze lingered on Mu Chen for a moment, and suddenly his eyes flickered, a soft surprise ringing in his heart. The very moment the Flame Emperor was taken aback, Mu Chen felt a slight tremor from within his body. Specifically, from the crystal pagoda of transcendence inside him. He immediately understood and was shaken. Just a glance, and he already noticed the crystal pagoda of transcendence within me.